Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Today, I'd like to discuss the quintessential Christmas story, um, the one which has Mary and Joseph getting on donkeys and traveling from Nazareth to Bethlehem in order to respond to a census that has been declared throughout the whole land, the whole empire. And while they were there, because they're in Bethlehem, because that's where Joseph's family is from, Joseph's from the line of David 1,000 years prior. Okay. So he has to return to the city of David to be counted by the Roman government so that they could be taxed and so that they have an idea of how many fighting age males there are to raise an army and etc. And so they make the journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem, no doubt very slowly, arriving in Bethlehem only to find it basically flooded with people, as one would expect, because there are 60 million people in the Roman Empire, and a good chunk of the people in their neck of the woods, the Jewish people, are of course from the line of David, and so they must also all have to return to Bethlehem as well. And so there's nowhere to stay. And so Mary ends up going into labor and gives birth in some sort of shelter, a cave or a barn or what, a stable, a manger, so that, with the baby Jesus coming forth in such humble ways. Okay, now while she's there, we have various visitations and whatnot, but that's the main story. That's what we set up the little diorama, what are those called? Nativity sets, at Christmas time. I remember those well when I got married eons ago. I received one as a wedding present, and it was actually kind of nice every year to set it up because it meant it was Christmas time, and I love these stories. But if we want to truly know who Jesus was, if we want to truly know Jesus, we need to look at the Jesus as he existed, the historical Jesus, and not the Jesus of church tradition. Okay, now you might be shocked to find out that we only have one source for this story. This story of going from Nazareth to Bethlehem only occurs in one place, and that's in the Gospel of Luke. Now, to many, that's not important because it is in the Gospel. However, there are countless sources we have in history with only one source, and they are roundly rejected because there's only one source. So, this is a problem. Okay, so let's look at what the other Gospels have to say about the way in which Jesus came into our world. Mark, of course, is our earliest Gospel, and more notably, it's the only one that comes the closest to being linked with one of the original 12 disciples. Okay, the others are complete mysteries about who wrote them, but we're fairly certain it was nobody that traveled with Jesus or that was with Jesus. Okay, Mark, there is a tradition that from Papias that this was written by Peter's companion. So this is what Peter was preaching as he went around to the Gentile nations proclaiming the gospel. Okay, and of course, if this is true, we note that Peter was not preaching a bodily resurrection, nor was he preaching this birth narrative, the virgin birth. Okay, so it's notable there. Now, Mark just knows Jesus is from Nazareth, which I believe is what people at the time would have known. If you would have wandered around the Galilee, and then later, as the religion grew into Judea and beyond, and asked people, where's Jesus from? They would all say Nazareth. Okay, so Mark 1:9, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee. Okay, and remember that they're well aware of the scriptures, talking about Jesus, about the Messiah being born in Bethlehem, but their Messiah, the Messiah that they follow, was not. So I suppose we can conjecture that they came to the conclusion that the old scriptures were errant or something had changed. I don't know, but they were as aware then as they were later. That Jesus, of course, did not come from Bethlehem. Okay, now we're going to jump ahead to John, because the Gospel of John joins Mark in not mentioning Bethlehem at all. John, of course, he is like he was back then, just Jesus of Nazareth. But he adds in that the crowds actively doubted he was from Bethlehem. Like, they assume he did not come from Bethlehem. And it was coming up in conversations. And so, let's see, John 7:41-42. How can the Messiah come from Galilee? Does not the scriptures say that the Messiah will come from David's descendants and from Bethlehem, the town where David lived? So clearly, just, they were aware of what the expectation was. But I find it notable that the author of this gospel doesn't clarify it. They just let that question hang out there. Because it says the crowds say this, yet no one answered them. Okay, no one said, well, actually, he was born in Galilee. They were there for a week. And, so technically, he was from, the city of David. No, they didn't do that. They, they just leave the question as is. Like Mark didn't even address it, but I imagine that John's audience as well just kind of knew that, that there was an expectation that it would come from David, but come from Bethlehem, but he didn't, so we're just going to get over it because it's clearly the Messiah. Move on. Now Matthew, we're going on to Matthew, is a little bit different. Matthew was written to a very Jewish audience. Okay, and so Matthew, of course, opens with a terribly exciting genealogy, and then has Mary and Joseph already living in Bethlehem now. So Matthew's community, this was clearly a problem. Okay, I think they were probably losing believers, or it was hard to convert the Jews of the community because they're saying, no, Jesus is born in Bethlehem, or the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. Jesus was not, therefore we don't. So Matthew has him there already in Bethlehem. And then, of course, once again, local knowledge of Jesus. Everybody knows at the time Jesus is from Nazareth. Okay, so Matthew relocated the Holy Family back to Nazareth at a later date, But Matthew goes through a distinction that no other Gospels go through. Matthew is trying hard to link Jesus to two Jewish heroes. Okay, David, of course, because he has to be from the line of David and from, the city of David. And this guy, Moses. We see the parallels, also not just parallels, they're the same almost, where, they escape to Egypt to, escape a mad king that's killing everybody, of the firstborns, and whatnot. They're clearly trying to associate Jesus with the Jewish patriarchs, the Jewish heroes, for a very Jewish audience. Okay, now we come to Luke, and the one that I really kind of wanted to focus on. Luke is where we get your Christmas play at church, with the kids. That's always so They're always great to watch. You love it when you see your kids in these things. Luke is where we get that story from, and Luke is the only place we find this story. Okay, so Mary and Joseph live in Nazareth. Okay, we can't get away from that fact. Luke, unlike Matthew, Luke acknowledges that, hey, everyone knows he's from Nazareth. I can't get out of this. All right, he's from Nazareth. But Luke adds a dimension to this. The government is forcing everybody to return back to where their ancestors are from, okay? And I guess you have to go back 1,000 years, because Joseph has to return to Bethlehem because he's related to David. I guess they drew the line at 1,000 years, because David himself had a lineage. But I guess we're just drawing the line at 1,000 years. So 60 million people all have to go. We're assuming this is across the whole empire. 60 million people all had to go to the land of their forefathers. Okay, so of course this would mean that the entire Roman economy would shut down. Okay, because everyone's zipping back and forth. And the army would have to disband, of course, too, because they would have to go back to their hometowns. And so the empire would be defenseless. You'd be traveling and you wanted to stop to get food, but there would be no vendors because they've also decided to go back, or been forced to go back to the lands of their predecessors. It makes no sense. It makes no sense, because in Mary and Joseph's case, they have quite the trip. It doesn't sound like it. I know that when we picture it, it's like, walking from the Battery to Midtown in Manhattan. It's not like undoable, but it's 90 miles. 90 miles. And I have 3 kids, and I remember very acutely trying to navigate with a 9-month pregnant woman in a car. Okay, and that took long enough. The idea that you're going to be in a caravan or on your own on foot, this is not a quick process, and this is empire wide, because nobody had fast transportation. So we're talking months the empire would have been shut down for. Okay, in Mary and Joseph's case alone, if they were a fast walking person like myself, could make the journey in about 7 days. But Mary wouldn't have been a fast-walking individual, and Joseph was of advanced age, more than likely. Okay, he wasn't a young cat like Mary was. So estimates ranged between 8 days on the, low end, up to 12. Because also those highways were dangerous, and there would have been criminals all along it, because you were forced to travel it. And so quite often, everyone, if you're going to Bethlehem, you're going to join with a bunch of other people that that are going to Bethlehem for protection. So moving as a group, that can take you 12 days each way. Okay, so this is not a short trip. Okay, so this is all a big disaster. The idea of this. So we're almost certain it didn't happen. Okay, because there was no census under Caesar Augustus, with Herod on the throne. Because remember, Herod has to be there because he's killing all the firstborns in Matthew. Okay, so it didn't happen. There was no census there. There was one under Quirinius, but Herod has been long dead at that point, and his son's been removed from power. Okay, so Jesus was probably in grade school, or the equivalent thereof, when this happened. It didn't happen. One of my nerd heroes here that I love in this subject is Dr. Bart Ehrman. And by the way, if you want to read books about historical Jesus, Dr. Bart Ehrman and Dr. James Tabor are some of the best communicators in this field. They're amazing. So whenever you see them on YouTube, make sure to watch. It's great stuff. Let's listen to Dr. Ehrman talk about the feasibility of the census narrative?
Of course, there's no record of that happening at all. No record of a census under Caesar Augustus. No way that Quirinius could have been the governor if Herod was the king. And you just kind of go down the list. The whole thing's implausible. You say, well, why did Luke give us this story? Because it's a story. It's not history. It's a story. And the story is meant to show that Jesus really did fulfill the scriptures. He was born in Bethlehem, even though everyone knew that he came from Nazareth.
Okay, so as you see, I mean, and he represents a good chunk of the, historian's view on this. Now, what does it matter? And I see a lot of times believers get offended at this, and you really shouldn't, and I don't want you to. My whole quest today isn't to debunk the Gospels, but actually to appreciate them. We need to appreciate them for what they are, okay? They are a narrative device used to teach the truth of Jesus and what he was preaching, okay? They're not history books, okay? So many people I've heard say they would love to go back to be in the crowd, the Sermon on the Mount. Well, I don't think you're going to make it, because not a lot of historians think that it actually happened. Okay, the Sermon on the Mount or the Sermon on the Plain, which are two opposite things, are probably literary devices to communicate a series of phrases that Jesus had been recorded saying over time, but they can't give the historical context for each phrase because the book would be way too long. So they grouped all of his individual teachings made at different times in different places and lumped them together in a sermon. Not because they were trying to fake an event, but so that they could convey what Jesus actually said to you in a way that was digestible. Okay, because I cannot imagine a gathering of thousands of Jews in a politically tense and tight area would have gone unnoticed or allowed to occur. Okay, that is a major security threat. Okay, so we're not trying to destroy it. I love the Christmas story, and knowing that this is historically inaccurate and it didn't happen, I will still go with my son and enjoy seeing the Christmas plays put on at the churches. It's part of our religion. It's part of the holiday. But it's an event that if you went back in time, you would not be able to see. Mary's birth process was probably the same as anyone else's. Mary was in her home, there in Nazareth, where she gave birth to Jesus. Now there's drama around that didn't involve Romans, okay, because remember, in Mary's community, she was outcast now because she was seen as adulterous. Okay, Jesus was born out of wedlock and by someone that wasn't her husband. Okay, so there's already a bunch of drama surrounding this birth. However, it's that, to me, that makes it even more meaningful. So just if you can, if you don't believe what the history seems to indicate, or that's fine. I don't need you to believe it, but join me together. Let's learn what we can about Jesus, and you can incorporate what feels right to you and discard what you don't. But I'm not here I don't want to debunk Christianity. I want to get to know who Jesus actually was. And this is Jesus' story. He was born in Nazareth. And everything else is set dressing. All right, thanks, folks, for joining me. And I look forward to speaking to you again.